At the time of initiation of this study, which was 10 years ago, checkpoint inhibitors had been shown to be improve survival in metastatic non-small cell lung cancer, both in the first and second line setting. However, at that time, we only had adjuvant chemotherapy for the additional treatment of early stage non-small cell lung cancer. But with adjuvant chemotherapy, at least 60% of patients still relapsed and died from the disease. So there was a need to improve the outcomes of this potentially curable population with early stage disease. And as a consequence of the results in the metastatic setting with PD-1 and PD-L1 inhibitors, we initiated this trial with a PD-1 inhibitor called durvalumab. So the study is a double-blind randomized phase 3 study of durvalumab versus placebo in stage 1B to 3A non-small cell lung cancer. We are presenting the disease-free survival results from this trial. This is the final analysis of the disease-free survival results. And we are presenting the results in the EGFR wild-type population. So the primary endpoint of the study is disease-free survival in those patients whose tumors were EGFR wild-type and had a PD-L1 score of 25% or greater. So that was the primary endpoint. There were 5 other secondary endpoints, which included disease-free survival in the population whose tumors had a PD-L1 score of 1% or greater, and then in all the EGFR and ALK wild-type patients, regardless of their PD-L1 status. And then there were further secondary endpoints of overall survival. We are reporting on the 3 populations, the primary endpoint and the 2 subpopulations in the EGFR wild-type population, which represents 1,219 patients. We registered 1,827 patients on trial. We randomized 1,415, and 1,219 of those patients were EGFR wild-type. And that's the group we're reporting on. The findings are that for the primary endpoint, which was disease-free survival in the patients whose tumor was EGFR wild-type and had a PD-L1 score of 25% or greater, there was no significant difference between the durvalumab arm and the placebo arm. And as far as the 2 secondary endpoints which we reported on, the results were similar. There was no statistically significant difference for that group of patients whose tumors were EGFR wild-type and had a PD-L1 score of 1% or greater, or in the overall group who were EGFR wild-type, regardless of PD-L1 status. There was no statistically significant improvement in outcome on durvalumab versus placebo. And in the subgroup analysis, there was no statistically significant difference between any of the important subgroups that we looked at. So the safety profile was similar to that seen in other large randomized phase 3 studies with durvalumab. It was very, very tolerable, and there were no unexpected side effects. It has left the field slightly confused because we have 3 large adjuvant randomized studies. The first one was the IMpower10 study with atezolizumab. The second was the Pearl study, which was the ERTC study with pembrolizumab. And now we have the Canadian Cancer Trials Group study with BR31 with a negative result. So we have a highly positive study, a somewhat positive study, and now a negative study. And it leads us wondering what the role of checkpoint inhibition is in the adjuvant setting in early stage non-small cell lung cancer. The field is moving, and so there have been a number of trials of neoadjuvant treatment and then what is known as perioperative treatment, where the patient gets both neoadjuvant treatment, then resection, and then adjuvant treatment. And we know, for instance, the AEGEAN trial with durvalumab, which is the drug that we used in our study, is positive. We also know that the Pacific study, which was in stage 3 disease, with durvalumab as adjuvant treatment, was positive. So it leaves us in a quandary as to what treatment to recommend. So my advice to physicians would be, you have to take into consideration the patient and the patient's characteristics, and then you have to explain to the patient the results of the 3 trials. And following that explanation, the patient can then make an informed consent as to what treatment they should have in the adjuvant setting.